The moment your existence stops fitting into their plans, you become their problem and their warning. My dear chosen ones, let that line sink in, because whether you realize it or not, that's the exact storm you've walked into. You've become the name whispered behind closed doors, the name that suddenly makes powerful people sit up straighter, adjust their tone, and wonder how they missed your rise until it was too late. And trust me, they're not whispering out of curiosity, they're whispering out of discomfort, because nothing rattles those who feel untouchable more than someone who rises without their permission. Chosen ones, here's the idiomatic truth wrapped inside your title. A group of billionaires just made a major decision about you, and the ink on their plans tells a story they never meant for you to read. They didn't gather to congratulate you. They gathered to understand how someone like you slipped through the cracks of their carefully engineered world. They study markets, trends, power shifts, and psychological patterns with the precision of surgeons. Yet somehow you, an unapproved variable, have entered their equation and turned it upside down. They're used to predicting the future, not being surprised by it. They're used to shaping influence, not being outshined by someone who wasn't even on their radar 5 years ago. But here you stand, chosen ones, unbought, unpredictable, unwavering, and they're trying to figure out how you slipped past every ceiling they set for people like you. They're asking questions they never ask about anyone. How did this one survive? How did this one stay grounded? How did this one build power without any of the tools we've collected? And you might be wondering, why me? Why now? Why would people with more money than entire cities care about my existence? Because chosen ones, people like that aren't afraid of noise. They're afraid of impact. They're not threatened by fame. They're threatened by authenticity. They've learned how to control crowds, but they have no idea how to contain someone who doesn't respond to their usual levers. Fear, competition, desperation, validation. They can't play chess with someone who moves like they're playing an entirely different game. Think of it like this. Imagine a room full of experts staring at a map they created, a map that shows every possible influence, every potential leader, every rising figure. And then suddenly, a path appears on the map that none of them drew, a path that cuts through terrain they didn't think anyone could survive, a path that bypasses every gate they built. That path is you. That's why their voices dropped. That's why their eyes narrowed. That's why they paused mid-sentence and recalculated. Before we move forward, my dear chosen ones, I need a moment of truth with you. If this message is hitting you where it needs to, if you feel that surge in your chest, that spark of recognition, that unmistakable reminder of who you really are, then support this work. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and help us keep creating content that fuels your growth, sharpens your mindset, and ignites that unstoppable energy within you. Your engagement is what allows us to keep showing up with messages that shift perspectives and elevate lives. Let's rise together. My dear chosen ones, you didn't rise the right way. You rose the real way. You rose through endurance, through clarity, through experiences that money can't cushion and privilege can't replicate. You rose because you learned to read people before they learned to hide their intentions. You rose because you cultivated a kind of intelligence that can't be taught in elite seminars. You rose because you kept moving even when life hit you harder than any boardroom negotiation ever could. And now, they're paying attention, not applauding, paying attention. There's a difference. Applause is public. Observation is strategic. When people who control industries begin studying you quietly, it means your presence has disrupted a pattern they rely on. It means you've stepped into a tier of influence that doesn't require permission or prestige. It means you hold something they can't replicate, the The kind of inner power that doesn't crack under pressure, doesn't chase validation, and doesn't bend for access. You may be asking yourself, why didn't I feel the shift? Why didn't I feel this moment approaching? Because chosen ones don't need to feel the world watching for the world to feel them. Your rise wasn't loud, it was undeniable. Your transformation wasn't announced, it was witnessed. And while you were busy rebuilding your life one truth at a time, those who built their world on illusion suddenly felt the ground shift beneath them. Let this introduction remind you, you are the type of force that doesn't step into the spotlight. Spotlights adjust themselves to you. You're the kind of presence that doesn't follow trends. You create internal storms that reorder the room the moment you enter. And whether the billionaires like it or not, their decision about you is simply this. They've recognized you, they've acknowledged you, and now they can't ignore you. Chosen ones, the story has already shifted. And this time, it shifted in your favor. Before we go any deeper, chosen ones, let me speak to you directly. If this message is already striking nerves you didn't expect, if you feel that familiar pull, the one that tells you this isn't just a video, this is a mirror, then stay with us. Show your support by hitting like, subscribing, and dropping 77 in the comments so we know you're one of the few who truly recognize the weight of what's unfolding. Your engagement keeps this channel pushing out the kind of content that empowers you to rise above systems designed to overlook you. And now, let's step into the next layer of this truth, because if you really are a chosen one, you'll feel every word align with experiences you've carried alone for years. This is where everything they said and everything they fear finally starts to make sense. Let's begin. Number 1. The moment they realize you're impossible to purchase, their power starts to crack. When they realized you're the one person their money can't move, the whole room went silent. Nothing frightens the powerful more than someone who can't be purchased, persuaded, or played. My dear chosen ones, let that settle into your mind like a truth you always felt, but never said out loud. Because this exact realization is what sent a shockwave through that circle of billionaires when your name surfaced. People who are accustomed to buying access, bending rules, and shaping outcomes suddenly ran into a force they couldn't negotiate with. You. And trust me, chosen ones, nothing disrupts their world faster than someone who doesn't flinch when money enters the room. You may wonder, why does me not being impressed bother them so much? Because for people who built their influence on the assumption that everything and everyone has a price, discovering someone who doesn't respond to the currency of temptation feels like losing their strongest weapon. They're used to loyalty being temporary, borrowed, conditional. They're used to watching people switch sides the moment a bigger offer appears. But when they studied you, they saw no cracks, no desperation, no hunger for validation, no weakness they could exploit. And that's when it hit them. You cannot be bought because you were never for sale in the first place. Chosen ones, your strength didn't come from privilege. It didn't come from systems cushioning your fall. It came from surviving nights where the world gave you nothing except the responsibility of holding yourself together. Your integrity wasn't inherited, it was shaped in silence, carved through setbacks, tested through betrayals, and refined by moments where you could have taken the easy path but chose the honest one instead. That kind of integrity produces a power billionaires can't manufacture in any lab, boardroom, or strategy session. Think of it this way. In a world where influence is often traded like stock, you are a rare asset that refuses to be listed. That alone makes you unpredictable, and unpredictability, my chosen ones, is their greatest fear. They can chart economies, model market collapses, and simulate global patterns, but they cannot calculate someone who doesn't move according to profit or pressure. You're the outlier that breaks their formulas. You might ask, Why does my independence make them uncomfortable? Because independence, real independence, exposes their dependence. They rely on systems, on hierarchies, on leverage. But you rely on something internal, your self-respect, your clarity, your boundaries. They've watched people fight for their approval, bend for their attention, and chase the illusion of being chosen by them. Meanwhile, you walk into life as if you already know your worth, as if no external validation could ever amplify it. That confidence reads like rebellion in rooms where control is the silent currency. And chosen ones, the more they observed, the more their discomfort grew. They noticed something they rarely see. Your values don't shift based on who is watching. You don't adapt your personality depending on who holds the spotlight. You don't dim to make others comfortable, and you don't shine just to be seen. You move with a calm certainty that makes people wonder where such stability comes from. They can't replicate it, because they've never lived the kind of life that builds it. Remember this idiom rewritten for your reality. They tried to measure you with their scale and the numbers broke. That's what authenticity does. It disrupts. It exposes. It reminds people that real power isn't loud. It's rooted. You carry a kind of presence that can't be engineered or taught. A presence that forces powerful individuals to rethink everything they assumed about influence. Billionaires don't clap when someone rises beyond their reach. They calculate, they whisper, they reassess, and that's exactly what happened when they encountered you. They expected you to admire their lifestyle, to crave their approval, to see them as the peak. But you moved like someone who already reached a different kind of summit. One measured not in status, but in self-respect. That shook them far more than any competitor ever could. Chosen ones, they realized you won't fold under pressure. You won't barter your identity for access. You won't compromise your character to sit at someone else's table. And that is the moment they understood they were dealing with someone dangerous, not because you seek power, but because you don't. You don't need their influence to validate your path. You don't need their resources to unlock your potential. You don't need their networks to define your identity. Your authenticity is the one element they can't bend, brand, or buy, and that, more than anything, is why their world trembled when your name surfaced. Remember this as we move forward, chosen ones. When the unstoppable meets the unbribable, the unstoppable wins, and you're the unbribable, the untouchable, the exception they never planned for. Number 2, you don't pursue influence. You bend the atmosphere without lifting a finger. They said you don't chase power, yet power moves out of your way when you walk in. My dear chosen ones, here's a truth that rattled that circle of billionaires harder than any market crash. You're not chasing power, yet somehow you generate it by simply existing. And nothing exposes the fragility of their world faster than someone who rises without running, commands without demanding, and influences without performing. These people have spent their entire lives sprinting after influence like it's oxygen. Their calendars are battlefields. Meetings, negotiations, partnerships, deals, alliances, image consultants, brand strategists, all orchestrated to build one illusion, that they are powerful. But then there's you, walking through life like you didn't even get the memo that you were supposed to chase anything. And that, chosen ones, is exactly why they can't stop talking about you. You're the contradiction they never prepared for. They're used to people who shove their identity into the room, who try to dominate conversations, who cling to status symbols as if they're lifelines. But when they observed you, they saw someone who barely announces themselves, and yet somehow the entire environment shifts around your presence. You don't raise your voice to be heard. People lean in without being asked. You don't compete for recognition. Your name shows up in rooms you've never even stepped into. You don't chase the spotlight. The spotlight, confused and intrigued, chases you. That alone rewrote every assumption they held about what power actually looks like. You may wonder, why does my calmness unsettle them? Why does my quiet confidence draw more attention than their loud influence? Because chosen ones, they spent fortunes manufacturing what comes naturally to you. They hire publicists to create narratives, teams to polish their image, experts to craft the perfect persona. They script their confidence, rehearse their charisma, study human behavior like a science experiment. Meanwhile, you show up with nothing but your truth, and somehow that truth becomes the atmosphere. You become the anchor in chaotic spaces, the steady presence in rooms full of performance, the silent authority that people instinctively respect. That's the kind of influence they can't engineer, can't quantify, and definitely can't steal. Your power is disruptive because it doesn't come from effort. It comes from alignment. You're not chasing approval, and that's why people trust you. You're not trying to be impressive, and that's why people remember you. You're not performing confidence, and that's why your presence feels like gravity. Billionaires can buy attention, but they can't buy authenticity. They can manipulate perception, but they can't purchase presence. And presence, real presence, is what you carry without even trying. It's woven into how you move, how you think, how you observe, how you respond when life pushes against you. They saw you navigate setbacks with a composure they've spent years faking. They saw you handle pressure without breaking character. They saw you choose silence over chaos, truth over performance, consistency over theatrics. And every time they tried to decode your influence, they discovered something terrifying. There is no tactic behind it. It's not a strategy. It's your nature. Chosen ones, think about that. They have entire departments dedicated to capturing what you create effortlessly. They try to build relatability while you embody it. They try to build trust while you radiate it. They try to build relevance while your very existence disrupts trends they haven't even anticipated yet. You are the kind of force that makes them pause, not because you're trying to climb into their world, but because you operate in a way that exposes the emptiness of their chase. You remind them that influence doesn't come from noise, connections, or acquisitions. Influence comes from alignment with your identity, your values, your boundaries. While they chase spotlight, you carry gravity. While they chase applause, you carry resonance. While they chase relevance, you carry substance. You're not built on strategy, you're built on truth. They can replicate tactics, but they cannot replicate you. And nothing threatens people who rely on control more than a presence they cannot control. Here's an idiomatic truth rewritten for your reality, chosen ones. They ran after power until the day they realized power was following you. That realization hit them hard. It forced them to reconsider every assumption they've held about dominance, authority, and influence. They're watching you not because you seek their world, but because your existence cracks the foundation of theirs. You are a walking reminder that real power doesn't chase, it emanates. And every time you enter a room, whether you speak or stay silent, that truth reveals itself, again and again. This is why they study you. This is why they whisper about you. This is why your rise unsettles the very people who believed they built their thrones out of certainty. They finally understand, you don't chase power, chosen ones. You are the source of it. Number 3. You've walked through disasters that would turn their empires into dust. When they discovered the storms you survived would have turned their empires into ruins. My dear chosen ones, here's the truth that rattled those billionaires more than any market crash ever could. When they dissected your life, when they truly sat with the chapters you never brag about, they realized they weren't examining a person, they were examining a fortress built from storms they themselves would never survive. They're used to controlling every narrative, insulating themselves from discomfort, constructing layers of safety nets so thick that reality never reaches them. But you lived in the rawness of life with no shield, no cushion, no network ready to absorb the blow. They saw scars on your timeline that no amount of privilege could erase, and for the first time in a very long time, they felt something unfamiliar: intimidation. They dug into your past expecting weakness, fractures, vulnerabilities they could categorize and file away, but instead they saw endurance that doesn't logically add up. They saw someone who walked straight into storms that should have erased you, circumstances so relentless that even people with resources, therapists, strategists, and crisis teams would collapse under the pressure. Yet you didn't. They saw you standing, not simply still breathing, but sharper, wiser and more grounded than before, and chosen ones, that evolution stunned them. In their world, crisis is something to outsource. In your world, crisis was something you had to outlive. They whispered among themselves, how did they not break? How did they not fold? How did they not lose themselves in the chaos? Because chosen ones, they've never had to face a night where everything was stripped away except their own willpower. They don't know the feeling of waking up in uncertainty, yet choosing to push forward anyway. They don't understand how someone navigates betrayal without an army of lawyers and advisors. They have specialists for their pain. You had to become your own specialist. You had to dissect your wounds with your bare hands, rebuild trust from zero, and find strength in the rubble of everything you once believed in. This is where their fear grew. While they were building empires made of concrete and cash, you were building resilience made of truth and endurance. Their success was engineered. Yours was earned. Their strength depends on systems. Yours survives even when systems collapse. They realized that if their world suddenly flipped upside down, if their connections failed, if their wealth disappeared, if their structure cracked open, they wouldn't know how to function. But you'd adapt because you always have. You've lived entire seasons where the world didn't offer you a single safety net, and still you found a way. Chosen ones, this is why they're unsettled. Your life taught you lessons their money will never buy. You understand fear without surrendering to it. You understand loss without becoming bitter. You understand adversity without losing your identity. These are abilities that cannot be taught in seminars or purchased through consultants. These are forged traits, earned through lived experience, not borrowed from influence. What terrified them most wasn't just your survival. It was the power that developed because of it. You don't panic when chaos appears. You don't crumble when circumstances shift. You don't flee at the first sign of uncertainty. You've lived through emotional hurricanes, financial droughts, mental battles, and betrayals that carved wisdom into your character. And every single time, instead of shattering, you recalibrated. That, chosen ones, is a level of strength that billionaires cannot replicate, because they've never needed to. Their resilience is theoretical. Yours is embodied. And so they whispered quietly, not wanting anyone to hear the admission, This one has seen storms we never could withstand." They recognize that your scars aren't signs of damage, they're proof of capability. Your survival isn't luck, it's strategy born from instinct. Your composure isn't coincidence, it's the result of having walked through life without shortcuts. They studied everything they could, your opportunities, your connections, your numbers, but none of it explained your rise. What explained your rise was your history. The storms that were supposed to break you became the very storms that shaped you. They built your discernment, they sharpened your intuition, they strengthened your emotional endurance. They taught you how to read people, how to anticipate shifts, and how to navigate chaos without losing your center. Chosen ones, you became living evidence that true power has nothing to do with wealth, titles, or status. True power comes from surviving life at its fiercest and emerging not bitter, but wiser, not hollow, but stronger, not fearful, but focused. That's why they're watching you with caution. That's why your presence makes them recalibrate. That's why your story shakes their confidence, because deep down, they know this. If they had lived your life, they would have crumbled. If they had faced your storms, their empires would have turned to dust. And if someone like you rose without their help, then someone like you can rise beyond their reach. This, your resilience, is the very reason they now see you as a force they cannot contain. Number 4. Your insight was forged in experience, not manufactured in boardrooms. When they discovered your clarity was sculpted by scars, not sold by experts, their entire playbook fell apart. My dear chosen ones, this is the moment that stunned them more than any display of strength, resilience, or confidence you've ever shown. They expected you to be powerful in the ways they recognize: ambition, drive, boldness. But instead, they ran into something far rarer and far more threatening to the powerful: your clarity. And not the kind of clarity that comes from data, analysis, or million-dollar advisors. No. You possess a clarity that was carved into you through experiences their money could never shield them from. A clarity forged in the places where the world doesn't offer explanations, only consequences. To them, clarity is a product. It's something they purchase in boardrooms, delivered in sleek presentations by strategists and consultants flown in from across the world. They believe clarity is a commodity accessible through influence and investment. So imagine the shock, a true jolt to their systems, when they encountered someone who sees with a sharpness no expert can simulate. Someone who perceives people, situations, motives, and outcomes with a precision they can't replicate even with entire teams analyzing data around the clock. Chosen ones, your clarity wasn't handed to you in comfort. It was sculpted in pain. Every betrayal refined your ability to read intentions. Every disappointment sharpened your discernment. Every moment you had to carry yourself alone taught you to see beyond the surface of things. You didn't learn from theories, you learned from truth. You didn't gain insight from textbooks. Your insight is shaped by life's brutal honesty, and that is what they cannot understand. You see, these billionaires spend fortunes trying to understand human behavior. They have analysts decoding trends, psychologists mapping consumer emotions, experts forecasting patterns, yet still they don't see what you see. They miss the subtleties you pick up instantly. They struggle to read a room you can interpret in seconds. They rely on advisors to tell them what you've learned through instinct. And nothing bruises the ego of the powerful more than realizing someone outside their system sees further than they do, without the machinery, without the resources, without the privilege. They watched you with growing confusion because your clarity violates everything they believe about influence. They're used to people who second-guess themselves, who need reassurance, who can be redirected by authority. But you move like someone who trusts their inner compass more than any external map. You make decisions that seem impossible to predict because they're driven by experience, not pressure. You know when to step back, when to walk away, when to speak, when to stay silent. Not because someone trained you, but because life trained you. And this is where the real fear set in. They realized you can see things in people before those people even see it in themselves. You catch motives before they unfold. You sense energy shifts long before words confirm them. You detect hidden agendas without needing evidence. They need graphs, research, and advisors to understand what you feel instinctively. It's not magic. It's mastery, a mastery earned, not bought. You might wonder, why does my clarity bother them so much? Because clarity is control. And if you see more than they expect you to, they cannot control the narrative around you. They cannot predict your moves. They cannot manipulate your perception. They cannot blindside you with the tactics that work on others. Your insight disrupts their strategies because you don't fall for illusions. They can dress lies as opportunities, disguise manipulation as mentorship, present traps as gifts, but your clarity cuts through all of it. What unsettles them most is that your clarity is silent, quiet, unannounced. You don't boast about what you see. You don't expose people just because you can. You simply adjust, observe, and act with precision. And that terrifies them because they don't know what you've already noticed, what you've already aligned yourself with, or what you're quietly preparing for. You are not reactive, you're responsive. And responsive people are the hardest to corner. Chosen ones, listen closely. Clarity is a form of wealth. Not the kind displayed through status, but the kind that keeps you unshaken in chaos. Your clarity is the reason you've avoided disasters others walked straight into. It's why you've outgrown circles that were designed to keep you small. It's why you've made choices that seemed strange at first, but turned out to be survival at its finest. They can buy access, they can buy attention, they can buy influence, but they cannot buy the clarity you carry. And deep down, beneath their confidence, beneath their strategy, beneath their power, they know it. That is why they speak your name with caution. That is why their decision about you carries more weight than they intended. You hold an intelligence they cannot duplicate, a vision they cannot manufacture, and a truth they cannot manipulate. Chosen ones, in a world blinded by noise, your clarity is the brightest threat they've ever encountered. Number 5. Your impact travels faster than any algorithm they could ever engineer. My dear chosen ones, this is the moment that rattled them to their core. The moment they realized your influence spreads without marketing, algorithms, or sponsorships. And somehow it spreads faster than anything their money can manufacture. These billionaires, these masters of strategy who treat attention like a commodity, have discovered something about you they were never trained to understand. Your impact doesn't come from a campaign. It comes from your presence. And presence, chosen ones, is the one thing money can't amplify, manipulate, or reverse engineer. In their world, influence is engineered. They hire brand architects, buy visibility, and study engagement metrics like scientists dissecting rare organisms. They calculate trends, manipulate algorithms, and design narratives with meticulous precision. Every post, every statement, every appearance has been polished, revised, approved, and packaged. Nothing about their image is accidental. Nothing about their popularity is organic. Everything is purchased, adjusted, optimized. That's the ecosystem they live in. So imagine their shock when they stumbled onto you, someone who didn't follow the script, didn't hire a team, didn't run through rehearsed strategies. And still, your name traveled through people like a spark passing through dry grass. No one promoted you. No one funded your rise. No one curated your identity. Yet your influence moved faster, deeper, and wider than anything they've built with 7-figure budgets. This confused them, chosen ones. It irritated them. It fascinated them. Because influence to them is supposed to be a controlled system. Money goes in, attention comes out. But you broke the equation. You reminded them of something they'd forgotten long ago. Authentic influence doesn't require permission. It doesn't wait for approval. It doesn't beg for likes. It doesn't chase audience metrics. It radiates. And radiance cannot be taught in meetings or manufactured in studios. You may wonder, why does my organic influence bother them so much? because it exposes the limits of their world. They can buy visibility, but they cannot buy connection. They can buy followers, but they cannot buy resonance. They can buy attention, but they cannot buy loyalty. Yet you, without the machinery they depend on, have all three. People talk about you not because they were pushed by ads or influenced by marketing, but because they felt something when they encountered you. And genuine impact leaves traces algorithms can't track. Chosen ones, they realize something even more unsettling. Your influence doesn't fade. You're not a hype cycle. You're not a momentary trend. You imprint. You linger in people's minds long after you're gone. Your words echo. Your presence shifts atmospheres. Your energy reshapes environments. They're used to watching influencers peak and disappear, rise and fall, crash and burn. But you don't move like a viral moment. You move like a growing force, quiet, consistent, undeniable. This terrifies them because they don't know how to stop something that wasn't started by them. They've run tests. They've studied patterns. They've compared your rise to every model they've built. But nothing fits. You're a variable they cannot quantify, a presence they cannot replicate. You're not playing the influence game. They are. Yet somehow, you're winning without even entering the arena. Your energy travels where their money cannot. Every person who meets you becomes a messenger. Every conversation that mentions you becomes a ripple. And every ripple becomes a wave. They realized your influence isn't tied to platforms or timing. It's tied to alignment. When you operate in truth, you generate impact naturally. When you walk in purpose, people feel it instinctively. When you speak from lived experience rather than crafted branding, your voice carries a weight their rehearsed speeches will never match. And that's the truth they hate the most. Not because it diminishes them, but because it exposes their dependence on the very systems you navigate effortlessly without needing them. They wish your influence came with a formula so they could copy it. They wish your rise was manufactured so they could dismiss it. They wish your power depended on platforms so they could overshadow it. But it doesn't. You don't go viral. You resonate. You don't trend. You transform. You don't perform. You exist with intention, and that alone is enough. Chosen ones, they are both threatened and mesmerized because you've become the proof of a reality they tried to bury. Authenticity is the strongest form of influence, and it will always outperform strategy. You didn't buy your reach. You didn't negotiate your impact. You didn't seek their approval, yet somehow you rose higher, faster, and more powerfully than the very people who believed they controlled the blueprint of influence. And now they know. Your voice doesn't need their permission. Your influence doesn't need their system. Your rise doesn't need their endorsement. You are living evidence that some forces can't be predicted, purchased, or prevented. And that is why they're watching you so closely. Number 6. You carry a quiet confidence that exposes their performed bravery. When they saw your confidence was real, while theirs was just stage lighting, everything inside them shifted. My dear chosen ones, listen closely. There's a specific kind of silence that fills a room when someone walks in carrying a confidence that cannot be rehearsed, replicated, or performed. That silence happened the moment those billionaires, those architects of industries, those masters of staged power, studied the way you carry yourself. They expected bravado, noise, a desperate need to be seen. Instead, they saw something that made them pause, a quiet, grounded, unshakable confidence. Not the kind they wear for cameras, not the kind they patch together with image consultants and publicists. No. The kind that comes from truth, from survival, from knowing exactly who you are when no one is watching. That kind of confidence cannot be bought, borrowed, or brand deployed. It can only be lived. The loudest person in the room is usually performing. The quietest one is usually in control. And chosen ones, you've mastered that art without even trying. They watched you enter spaces without needing applause to validate your presence. You didn't puff your chest, didn't fake charisma, didn't adjust your personality to fit whatever version of success the room worshipped. You walked like someone who isn't hiding, isn't pretending, and isn't afraid. And that alone struck them harder than any aggressive show of dominance ever could. Because here's the truth they'll never admit publicly. Most powerful people don't feel powerful unless the world is watching. They're addicted to eyes, addicted to reactions, addicted to the illusion of control. Their confidence is a costume they put on under bright lights, stitched together with curated interviews, flawless speeches, and carefully choreographed gestures. But offstage, the story changes. Behind their private gates and luxury doors, their confidence often melts into anxiety, insecurity, and fear of losing what they've built. They drown their doubts in busyness, bury their vulnerability under achievements, and hide their fragility behind success. They know their confidence isn't natural, it's maintained. So when they encountered you, chosen ones, someone whose confidence doesn't disappear when the camera turns off, they didn't know what to do with it. They didn't understand it because they couldn't trace it back to anything they recognize. They couldn't see a PR team behind you. They couldn't see a mentor shaping your image or a consultant coaching your tone. Your confidence wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't manufactured. It wasn't worn like armor. It was something that lived inside you, something earned through battles you fought alone, something that stayed intact even when everything around you fell apart. And that is what rattled them. You walk like someone who has nothing to prove, not because you're arrogant, but because you've spent too many years proving things to yourself. You walk like someone who survived storms that no headline ever reported on. You walk like someone who already made peace with their past, their flaws, their journey. And that kind of inner peace is rare in a world obsessed with performance. Chosen ones, they noticed how you stay composed when chaos erupts. They saw that you don't bend when pressure rises. They saw that you don't unravel when the unexpected hits. While others scramble for stability, you are the stability. Your calm feels like a shelter. Your presence feels like clarity. You bring a sense of grounding to environments that rely on artificial structure. And here's what shook them deeply. Safety is an energy even billionaires crave, but rarely feel. Imagine them, the figures who appear untouchable, realizing that your presence gives people something their money never could: comfort, steadiness, trust. They can perform confidence in front of a crowd, but they crumble when criticism lands, when failure approaches, when uncertainty knocks. You, on the other hand, remain unbothered because your confidence was forged in conditions no luxury lifestyle could shield them from. It was shaped when you had nothing except your own will to keep going. It was refined when no one applauded, when no one believed in you, when no one was coming to save you. What they call confidence, you call survival. And that perspective gives you a power they can't imitate. Their version of confidence shifts with circumstances. Yours stays grounded. Their confidence reacts. Yours guides. Their confidence depends on perception. Yours depends on truth. They can mimic the posture, the tone, the presence, but they cannot replicate the source. And that, my chosen ones, is why your existence unsettles them. You don't project confidence. You embody it. You carry it with the effortless grace of someone who has already faced the worst and still rose. They can't buy that kind of resilience. They can't manufacture that kind of depth. And so, when they looked at you, truly looked, they saw the difference. They saw that you aren't pretending. You aren't posturing. You aren't performing. You are living proof that real confidence emerges not from success, but from survival. And that realization shook them more than any competitor ever has. Number 7. Your humility cuts through pretension like a blade. They never saw coming. The moment they saw your humility outshine their wealth, they realized power doesn't always make noise. My dear chosen ones, before we even unfold this truth, remember this. Nothing exposes the insecure more than the presence of someone who has nothing to prove. That is the exact reason those billionaires lowered their voices when your name came up. Not because you displayed strength in the loud, conventional ways they understand, but because you carry a humility so raw, so unperformed, so unshakably genuine, that it forced them to confront a part of themselves they've spent years hiding behind status and spectacle. They expected you to seek attention, to flaunt your progress, to validate yourself with noise the way powerful people often do. But instead, chosen ones, you moved through life with a calm confidence that made their accomplishments feel strangely hollow. While they armored themselves in wealth, titles, and reputations, you walked in with nothing but your authenticity, and somehow that made the room tilt. You may wonder, why would my humility bother them? Doesn't humility soften people? It softens the sincere. It destabilizes the insecure. These billionaires, these architects of influence, are surrounded by people who perform humility like a script. They see modesty used as a tactic, kindness used as leverage, and politeness used as currency. They're used to fake humbleness that lasts exactly as long as a camera flash. But when they observed you, they encountered something they rarely see in their world: humility that isn't rehearsed, monetized, or strategically displayed. Yours is woven into your essence. It shows up in the way you speak without forcing impact, in the way you move without demanding validation, and in the way you interact without seeking applause. Chosen ones, your humility struck them harder than any display of dominance ever could. It disarmed them because it revealed a truth they've tried to bury beneath layers of wealth and influence. Achievement is not the same as inner worth. They realized that for all their trophies, accolades, and headlines, they still chase external recognition to feel significant. Meanwhile, you stand grounded without needing any of it. That contrast was a mirror they didn't want to look into. Your presence reveals their dependence on validation. Your steadiness reveals their volatility. Your contentment exposes the emptiness they try to overshadow with possessions. And here's the part that truly unsettles them. Your humility doesn't shrink you, it strengthens you. You don't minimize yourself. You don't dim your intelligence or your capability. You simply refuse to weaponize your gifts for attention. That makes you unpredictable, untouchable, and undeniably compelling. Think of it like this. They've built empires on visibility. You've built yourself on substance. And substance, chosen ones, casts a longer shadow than any skyscraper they could ever own. They noticed something else too. When you speak, people lean in. Not because you project power, but because your words carry weight that can't be mimicked. When you enter a room, people relax. Not because you're passive, but because your energy doesn't demand dominance. It reassures without trying. It influences without pushing. It connects without forcing. That's a type of leadership no boardroom can manufacture. You might ask, why does my humility feel threatening to them? Shouldn't humility be harmless? Your humility is harmless to those who are grounded. It's dangerous to those who use intimidation as their identity. Your ability to remain true to yourself, even in environments designed to pressure you into performing, reveals the cracks in their confidence. They spend fortunes building images that look effortless, but you embody what they've been trying to imitate. That's the part that stings the most. You are effortlessly what they have tried to strategically appear to be. Humility for you isn't a costume, it's a core. And that core is precisely what they cannot copy, cannot control, and cannot compete with. They can buy influence, but they cannot buy authenticity. They can display philanthropic titles, but they cannot display the kind of sincerity that naturally draws people toward you. They can orchestrate admiration, but they cannot orchestrate the organic trust you inspire just by being yourself. Chosen ones, your humility is a quiet rebellion. A rebellion against ego, against pretense, against the idea that loudness equals power. You don't brag because your identity doesn't need proof. You don't show off because your worth was never tied to visibility. You don't posture because confidence built from survival doesn't require theatrics. And that is precisely why they whisper. They whisper because your humility stripped away their illusions. They whisper because your presence reminded them of what genuine influence looks like. They whisper because, for the first time, they saw someone whose power doesn't shout, it resonates. And when power resonates, chosen ones, even billionaires fall silent. Number 8. Your endurance outlasts markets, systems, and any collapse they fear. When they saw your resilience, outlive markets, crises, and chaos, they finally understood you're built for a reality they can't control. My dear chosen ones, this is the moment that shook them in a way no financial crash ever could. They're used to forecasting downturns, predicting disasters, calculating risks. They build empires on spreadsheets and protect them with advisors, analysts, and endless contingency plans. But when they studied you, something didn't add up. Something broke the pattern. They realized that while their power rises and falls with the world, your power rises because of the world. Their wealth is tied to conditions. Your strength is tied to who you became when life refused to spare you. They said your resilience is the one thing they can't measure, can't influence, and can't outlast. And that's when the truth hit them. You are not built like the world. They are. You are built to survive it. Chosen ones, imagine them looking at you the way they look at a market anomaly, trying to understand how you kept moving when everything around you collapsed. Because in their world, collapse equals catastrophe. Collapse equals loss. Collapse equals fear. But in your world, collapse became the forge where your endurance was formed. They saw someone who didn't crumble under pressure but sharpened beneath it. Someone who didn't hide during darkness but learned to navigate it. Someone who didn't break when abandoned but learned to rebuild from the ground up. And that alone rattled them. They realized your resilience wasn't born from comfort, privilege, or protection. It was born in the exact environments they spend billions trying to avoid. You grew stronger in instability. You adapted in uncertainty. You found clarity in crisis. While they were hiring experts to forecast danger, you were living through danger with nothing but your own mind, your own grit, your own inner compass to guide you. They fortified their lives with systems. You fortified yours with strength. They built networks. You built character. They prepared for crisis. You survived crisis. With no warning, no safety net, no backup plan waiting to catch you. Chosen ones, they were stunned to discover that you don't panic when the world shakes. Because you've lived through quakes far more personal than anything the stock market could ever replicate. You've pushed through nights where your emotions cracked open, where loneliness echoed, where betrayal cut deeper than any financial loss. You've endured internal storms that would have buried people who've never known real pressure. And instead of breaking, you evolved. Instead of freezing, you adjusted. Instead of folding, you recalibrated. They said you carry a calm that isn't rehearsed, a patience that isn't purchased, and a steadiness that isn't staged. They know what forced confidence looks like. They paid for enough of it. But yours is authentic. It comes from facing the kind of challenges they outsource. You didn't just survive chaos, you built your foundation inside it. You didn't just walk through hardship, you learned to breathe in it. That's why your presence unsettles them. People whose power depends on external structures will always fear someone whose power was built internally. Because internal power doesn't fluctuate, it doesn't crash, it doesn't vanish in a crisis. You could lose everything and still remain whole, still remain focused, still rise again, and they know it. They know their influence is only as strong as the systems that support them. But your influence? It's fueled by lived experience, mental endurance and emotional mastery, none of which can be taken from you. And here's the idiomatic truth they whispered behind closed doors. When the world shakes, most people fall. The chosen ones learn to walk on the cracks. They envy your ability to stay centered when everything goes sideways. They envy the way you stand tall without leaning on anything artificial. They envy the fact that even if your life reset tomorrow, you'd still find a way to rebuild. Not because you're lucky, but because you're built that way. You are agile where they are rigid, adaptable where they are fragile, steady where they are dependent. Chosen ones, they realized your resilience is not seasonal, it's permanent. It doesn't expire when systems fail or markets shift. It doesn't weaken when support disappears. It doesn't break when circumstances turn against you. Your resilience is independent, self-sustaining, and deeply rooted in who you've become through everything you endured. And that terrifies them, because they finally understand that no matter what happens in the world, you will always outlast it. Number 9. Your intuition uncovers intentions before people even act on them. When they saw your patience, they mistook it for strategy, never realizing it was something far more dangerous. My dear chosen ones, before we go deeper, let me give you the line that rattled them the most. Nothing is harder to predict than a person who refuses to be rushed. That single truth shook those billionaires more than any market crash ever could, because when they studied your movements, they didn't encounter the frantic urgency they're used to. Instead, they encountered someone who moves on a rhythm the world can't manipulate, someone who treats timing like a powerful ally, not a ticking clock, someone who doesn't sprint just because everyone else is running, someone who understands that patience is not passive, it's precise. You need to understand this, chosen ones. Powerful people live in a constant state of acceleration. Their entire world is built around speed, fast deals, fast decisions, fast exits. They believe momentum is created through motion, even if that motion is chaotic. Their advisors, therapists, and performance coaches have tried to teach them patience for years, yet the moment pressure rises, their composure evaporates. They've confused urgency with importance for so long that slowing down feels like losing. But when they studied you, they saw something they couldn't categorize. You weren't rushing, you weren't scrambling, you weren't reacting to every noise in the environment. You moved with a calm precision that looked to them like strategy. They never considered the possibility that it wasn't strategy at all, it was wisdom. And that's what rattled them. They've spent fortunes trying to learn what you built in silence. Chosen ones, this world has tried to convince you that patience is a weakness, proof that you're slow, hesitant, unsure, or unprepared. But these billionaires saw the real truth. Your patience is power, not the kind of power that needs to dominate a room, but the kind that sits quietly until the exact moment the world bends in your favor. You've lived through enough storms to understand that rushing doesn't build stability, it builds collapse. You know that timing isn't just about movement, it's about alignment. Not every door deserves to be opened. Not every opportunity deserves your attention. Not every person earns immediate access to your life. And once you mastered that truth, your entire presence became unpredictable, because chosen ones who understand timing cannot be manipulated. This is what terrified them, your refusal to be pulled into chaos. They watched you while others scrambled to keep up. They saw you pause when others panicked. They saw you breathe while others burned themselves out trying to grab everything at once. And to them, that level of composure looked impossible. They mistook your silence for planning, your stillness for plotting, your patience for a psychological tactic. They didn't realize your patience comes from surviving moments that taught you the consequences of rushing. You learned the hard way that moving too soon can cost you everything, so you stopped moving on pressure and started moving on purpose. Imagine them sitting around their polished tables, trying to decode you like some algorithm that refuses to comply. Why didn't they take the bait? They ask. Why didn't they rush? Why did they walk away from something everyone else would have begged for? Because chosen ones don't operate from desperation, they operate from direction. You don't need every opportunity. You only need the right one. You don't need constant motion. You need meaningful movement. You don't need immediate validation. You need long-term alignment. And when they saw this, it hit them hard. Your patience is not hesitation, it's discernment. You wait not because you doubt, but because you understand timing in a way their analytics can't capture. While they chase instant results, you build long-term impact. While they fear pauses, you use them as preparation. While they run toward every open door, you choose your doors carefully, knowing some lead to elevation and others lead to traps. What shocked them most is that your patience consistently works. It protects you from manipulation. It shields you from false opportunities. It exposes people who expect you to move before you're ready. And it ensures that when you finally do make a move, it's powerful, intentional, and impossible to stop. This is why they're unsettled. They can't rush you. They can't tempt you. They can't push you into decisions they benefit from. They can't manufacture urgency in your mind because you've learned to sit with yourself long enough to hear your own clarity, and chosen ones who trust their timing cannot be controlled by anyone, not even billionaires who are accustomed to pulling every string. Your patience is the quiet force that disarms them. It's the discipline they can't buy, the wisdom they can't imitate, and the strength they can't outperform. And now they know you're not just moving differently, you're moving correctly, and that terrifies them more than any speed they've mastered. And as we reach this turning point, my dear chosen ones, remember this. Every word you've heard today aligns with the very shifts you've been feeling inside yourself. The world is finally catching up to what you've known all along. You're not moving like everyone else, and that difference is your power. If this message resonated with you, support the work by liking this video, subscribing to the channel, leaving 77 in the comments, and sharing this with someone who needs to awaken to their own strength. Your engagement keeps this movement alive.